Slurpty-derp, my wonderful G's. I hope you're all doing well. I'm very excited to be back with you guys in the YouTube nest here in Berlin. I was away over the weekend in Serbia playing a show, and I had quite an experience, actually, quite a journey. I sort of started to get ill last week, and then I had to go to the airport while I was still sick. And then, the day of the show was still really, really rough, and then that evening it came around to the time for the event, and I was still sort of in the hotel room, just like sort of dying. And I sort of had a really long cold shower, got myself up and ready, and then as soon as I stepped up on stage to start DJing, I felt my spirit lifted when I started playing the drum and bass, and I sort of forgot about everything else, and the drum and bass healed me. And then the next day I was sort of almost back to normal, so it was a great little turnaround, but I had a great time. But it's good to be back with you guys here. I wanted to answer a subscriber's question because I didn't get time to do it last week. And he says, Rob Barrel, thank you for writing. I've got a question unrelated to the sample pack. Thanks everyone who grabbed my Vital preset pack recently as well. The new one, which is great, by the way. I've noticed that when I program different notes on sub bass, there's a different perceived loudness with some notes over others. Should I adjust the amplitude or possibly velocity or something to try to sort that? Or can it be done with compression or another way? Cheers, mate. Appreciate your content. So I thought I'd take this question and expand upon it and do a little, just talk about my favourite notes to use for the sub bass in drum and bass, because I think it's something that you always have to be mindful of, what notes you're using, and you will have a difference in the perceived volume of a sine wave depending on which pitch it's played at. So I love to use a sine wave as the sub bass. Obviously it's the most powerful oscillator, and I always like to look in that roughly that range of -30 to -36 for a good level for the sub on the default settings of span. And I have a sort of golden formula for which notes are kind of the best sounding for drum and bass, in my opinion, and those are typically for me anywhere sort of between D and G, and obviously making sure that I'm playing it at the right octave range, so it's down in the 30-40 hertz area, not up here, because that up at the 80 hertz sort of range, in that octave range, it's not really a sub bass to me anymore. That's just a mid bass then at that point. But when you're dealing with the sub bass, my golden my favorite notes to use are going to be D, which sits about 36 hertz or so. Don't worry so much about the readout, because with the sine wave in the low end, it takes up such a broad part of the frequency spectrum. It's not going to be accurate to measure. It's difficult to measure it accurately. Don't get too hung up about that. But you can see where a D is supposed to be. It's around 36.8 hertz or something like that. Okay, and then D sharp is great. E is excellent. I love E. About 41 hertz or so. F, very classic drum and bass note to use, probably the most used note, I would say. That's around 43.7 hertz. F sharp's great. G is great. G is still around just under 50 hertz still. Then when you start to get higher up than G, sort of G sharps, A sharp, there are many drum and bass tracks in that with that note as the root note, and that's still fine. It just doesn't quite hold the same power and weight of a sub bass that's been played a bit lower down as your root note, So I always love between D and G. I feel that's the best balance where you get the most power for your sub bass, Now, if you go down to C, for example, then you're all the way down at around 32 hertz or so. I have written tracks in C, not by optimum choice, but because I've worked with vocalists who've sent recordings that are pitched to C, so I ended up making a sub bass in C, and I still use that low range there at the sort of 32 hertz range or so, but to make it a bit more audible on sound systems, for that, what I do then is I add in another sine wave an octave higher, And then this one, I won't have it quite as loud, but I'll just turn that down a bit. And then I'll have sort of almost two fundamentals, but the higher one will be a lot lower down. And so that's the sort of C, then up at 66 hertz or so, 65, 66. But that's not the main fundamental. It's just like an addition. So you can sort of hear the first fundamental a bit clearer as they sort of combine together. So when I'm doing like low tracks in C, that's how I would go about that. But that's the lowest I would go on the keyboard. So it's very simple. It's like the C is like the lowest I'd ever go. And then so if I was going to a B, I probably wouldn't go lower. I'd use the higher B. So if I had to use the B, I'd probably do it up here, which is still for me a little bit too high for a sub bass. You know, it's 61 or 62 hertz. I don't really like that. I could try to avoid having a track in B if possible. And then A, obviously I'd use that range as well, you know, so the A would be around 55. And that's okay as well. Like, it's just not quite as powerful and weighty as if you're writing a track, you know, down at D or E or F or something, you know. But yeah, that's just the first point cleared up on like where I kind of try to write my tracks if I've got the choice. Again, there's no real rules here. You can always break those rules. That's just like my optimum favorite places to write D and B tunes from. Then let's talk about the volume difference. So you do have this perceived volume difference. If I play like a low D and then I play like a high D, for example, it does seem a lot louder because the higher up the note you play for a sine wave, it will start to feel like louder to your ears, you know. But there's a funny thing that happens if you try to like solve that by compression, which I have tried to, just to show you for this example. You know, if I try to you know, have a D, my low D is, let's say, the compressor's whacking it down -5 here. Then I play like a higher D. It does sound a lot louder, but the compressor's not actually turning it down more. It's still bringing it down to the same point, you know? And so that's one of the rare cases where a compressor doesn't really do the job for me in that regard. So when it comes to like the sine wave volumes in your low end, if you really wanted to have that control of the volume of the particular notes, I would always just adjust the note manually. For if you have one note that's too loud, I would just bring that one down in the velocity or with automation, for example. If you're feeling a bit lazy and you want to try something fun, you can also put your note modulation on the sine wave in Vital on the level, swing it around halfway to the left or so, and then I can basically I've now got the higher notes are gonna have a slightly lower level. It does it quite well. It doesn't go all the way down, perhaps as much as you'd like it to, but that D now, if I play the higher one with it on, you know, it's sort of around, you know, in this sort of range here. If I was to turn that back off again, you know, it's quite a lot higher with that off. So it does make quite a nice difference if you do the track, if you track the track the note section here to the level of your sine wave, then you can get a little bit more control and have those higher notes be not quite as loud. But however, when I'm realistically writing drum and bass and sticking to that main octave range, you know, between D and then, you know, up to G or A even, you know, in that sort of area, there's not really so much of a difference to me, you know, in that one octave, you know, all the way from C, the low C, all the way up to B. In that range, there's not really a noticeable difference in the perceived volume to me personally. It's only when you go up to the next octave that you'll have that like loud difference in volume, because the sine waves suddenly become a lot higher up and more piercing, and then but to me that's then not a sub bass anymore, you know. Then you're in a mid bass sine wave territory, which you have to treat the whole thing as a separate kind of instrument, you know. So When it comes to the sub bass and the volumes, as long as you stick within that 1 octave range, I don't really feel like the perceived volume is so different that I ever worry about it. So I never really actually end up doing any volume adjustments for the sub bass in that regard, because I always keep the sub bass within that same octave range, and there's never for me enough of a difference in the perceived volume to worry about it. There might be a slight amount, but I think that's just a natural. I think that's quite just a natural little change in the dynamics of your track that isn't not really ever an issue for me. But yeah, if you're doing something crazy where you're going like from a low D up to a high D or something, yeah, you can try just something like this in Vital, and it'll like make that higher note a little bit less loud. That's one way you could go about it. But again, you're kind of then exiting the sub bass area anyway, so yeah, you can always just adjust those extra loud higher pitch notes manually in your project. I would do it that way. But yeah, that's just to try and clear that up for you. I hope that was helpful. But yeah, just if you stick to that golden range when you're like trying to pick a note for your drum and bass track, especially if you guys are new to the channel and you're like for the first time designing drum and bass and trying to compose it, I would really suggest, the first thing that you do is you set your BPM, what speed you're going to write your track at, and then you decide what's the root note of your track. Sometimes I'll have lessons with students and I'll ask them what root note is your track in, and they don't know. And that is literally, I wouldn't even start doing anything until I know what root note my track is in, because it's the foundation of everything. So BPM and root note is before you put any sound into your canvas. You've got to know what that's going to be, And yeah, if you can get to pick your root note, because you're not tied down to a specific pitch of a sample that you're using or a vocal that you're using, and you're able to choose freely, then I would always pick somewhere between D and G. D for extra power and weight, and yeah, if even going up to G, you've still got enough kind of power in your sub bass. But yeah, start going higher up to A and things like that. It's going to be fine. Any other note, it's going to be fine. You can make it work. But if I had to pick, it would be between D and G. All right. So hope that was a helpful tip for you guys. Great to be back in the studio. Leave some comments down below if that helps you out. If you've got any more questions, I'll happily clear things up from my perspective, at least. I don't claim to be the best, most knowledgeable producer on the whole internet. I could just give you things that I've learned in my journey and hope that they will help you. So anyway, thanks for watching my G's. Much love and take care.